All right, good morning, everyone. Before we get into Mark chapter 5, I want to back up to the last little bit of Mark chapter 4, where Jesus and his disciples were on the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up, and they think they're going to die, and Jesus is asleep in the boat, and you know the story. He calms the storm. What you may not know is that during this period of time, there was a belief, a superstition, whatever you want to call it, that even though the Sea of Galilee was excellent for fishing, there was a belief that beneath the surface were evil spirits that inhabited the lake, and many people thought that maybe that was what caused the storms. The spirits would get all upset about something and they'd create a storm, either to create havoc or actually try to kill someone. So whether these disciples believe that or not, I'm sure that the guys who were the fishermen were aware of this. And so this storm comes up, and it's a terrible experience, but they finally survive that, and they finally come ashore. They're safe. And then chapter 5 hits them. So the way my mind works, I'm thinking these guys are thinking, oh, thank God, we made it through the storm, and they hit land, and then they see these two guys coming at them. Is like, maybe we need to just go right back out into the water. So we want to pick up in chapter 5 now. Mark mentions only one demon-possessed man, and so does Luke. Matthew mentions two. Most scholars think the reason that Mark and Luke only mention one is because there was probably only one of them was really a spokesman for the two of them. So we're going to just kind of assume that there are two, and it says that in chapter 5, verse 2, it says, "When he," this is Jesus, "got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain." So when you read through all three of the accounts, you have these two men who have at some point become possessed by demons. And it's a large number of demons, as we'll see in just a minute. But when you read through this, it is a really frightening thing what these guys were going through. It says they were probably been kind of cast out, forced out of where they were living. Were having to live among the dead. That these tombs were probably caves that were carved in the side of the mountain where people were buried. There may have been some that were vacant, and so they lived there. They're naked. They have gashed themselves with stones. They're unable to be chained up, and they are screaming and wailing at all times of the day and night. And so try to imagine that you live in this region, and you finally got everything settled for the night, and you're getting ready to lay down and go to sleep, and all of a sudden you hear this ungodly screaming and wailing that is echoing through, and you know who it is. You know it's these guys out there, and they're pitiful. So they come running up to Jesus. Now, what is interesting, it says that when Jesus got out of the boat, it doesn't say that any of the disciples got out of the boat. And so I have the impression these guys are going to wait and see what happens before they get out of the boat. So Jesus gets out of the boat, and these guys come running up to him. And they bow down, not in a form of worship, but in that culture, many times a lesser important person or someone that had come into the presence of someone who was extremely powerful, either militarily or politically, it was just a custom you would bow down before that person. And so they begin this conversation with Jesus. What are you doing here? What do we have to do with each other? And Matthew adds a little phrase in there that is a little telling about what the situation with demons. He says, "You haven't come to us before the time. And that is a reference, I believe, to the final judgment. The demons know what the end game is for them. They know what their final situation is going to be along with Satan. They know that. But they know also that before that time comes, they have a little bit of free reign to do some things, to do as much damage, to create as much misery as they can. So they're basically saying to Jesus, you're not going to do that, are you? You're not going to cast us. In fact, one phrase there says into the abyss. The abyss was like the underworld, or where things would go and never return. So you're not going to do that to us, are you? In fact, it says, go down to verse 7, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. And shouting with a loud voice, he said, what business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me. The literal translation of that is this: swear to God that you won't do this to me. Swear to God that you are not going to torment us. Because they knew that Jesus had the power to do that. And it's interesting, almost every time that Jesus comes in contact with someone who's possessed by a demon, the demon is more aware of who Jesus is than the people who are around him who should know who he is. I mean, even James later on says the demons see and they believe. Now, they don't have a believing faith, but they know who Jesus is. And they know he has the power to do whatever he wants to with them. And so they're begging him, don't do this to us. So he begins to ask him, he says, what is your name? He says, my name is Legion, for we are many. And they begin to say, don't send us out of the country. And so there was a large herd of swine or pigs in the area, which probably means this was Gentile territory. Now, there are some, I read one commentary who said that he believed that this was actually, these pigs were owned by a Jew, which would be pretty hard to believe because that was strictly forbidden by the Mosaic law. So it was probably a Gentile who was raising these and would sell them to the Roman army for meat. So you've got all these pigs over there, and the demons say, let us go into them. Let us go into the pigs. And so it says that, and Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000, and they drowned in the sea. Now, I grew up in rural South Alabama, and we had, when I can remember, as a very small boy, we had some pigs out there, but there was also some people who actually raised a lot of pigs. Now, there's a couple of things about pig farms that some of you may know. But number one, you will smell a pig farm about a half mile before you ever get to the pig farm. I mean, there's no, I mean, if you ever smell it once, it is unmistakable. You know it's there. You may not see them, you may not hear them, but you know they're there. Whereas you can, and I've never seen a herd of 2,000, but I've seen, large groups of them, and when they get excited or they get addled about something, or it's time to feed, they make this horrific sound, and they just go. I mean, it don't matter what's in the way; they're going to try to get to that place to eat.
Go hog wild.
Yeah, hog wild. Yeah, and so I can only imagine 2,000 of these things possessed by demons, what that must have looked like. and just running right off the cliff and go out and sea and drowned. And so it says, verse 14, their herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. My guess is that these guys who were watching the swine were not the owners, but they probably went back into town and said, we got a problem with the swine. Well, what's the problem? Said, well, they are drowned. And he said, well, how did that happen? So, well, you just need to come see. And so obviously there was word spread, so it wasn't just the owners, it was probably a large number of people came there to see what was going on. So they come up on this scene. Now again, I think Matthew's account said these guys had been possessed for a long time. Now, it doesn't say how long a long time is, but it could be months, it could have been years, that these two demon-possessed guys have pretty much controlled this area. I mean, you would not want to go anywhere near these guys for fear of what might happen. So everybody knew who these guys were. So they come walking up and they recognize them. They're sitting there. It says clothed and in their right mind. So somehow they were able to tell right away something has happened. So the question that comes up amongst this is, why did Jesus allow, and it's interesting because if you're not careful, you'll read this incorrectly. Jesus did not cast the demons into the swine. The demons said, can we go into the swines? And Jesus said, yes. He gave his permission. You can leave these guys, and you can go into the swine. So Jesus wasn't necessarily trying to punish the swine or punish the owners of the swine. He just gave them permission. So these guys come up, and the first thing they do is they see these two guys sitting there at the feet of Jesus. They are clothed. They probably washed themselves up a little bit and probably having a discussion with Jesus, a logical, normal discussion. So that's the first thing they see. And then it says, those who had seen it described how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. And they began to implore him to leave the region. So they come up, they see these guys. It says they are frightened. Some say they're filled with fear. And they want Jesus to leave. Why? Do what? Money. Okay. They've obviously had a financial loss with those swine going into the sea and drown. They've lost that, so I don't want to lose anything else. Is there another possibility?
Possibility is the owners of the pigs would be after.
Would be what now?
The people who own the pigs would want retribution from Jesus for destroying their herd.
Okay. So, you killed 2,000 of our swine, you need to pay up. Is there anything else? What? Okay, what are they afraid of? So, obviously they're afraid, but what is it? What are they afraid of? Okay. If this guy, because if you remember, when Jesus calmed the storm, what did the disciples say? They were afraid. Even though he had saved their life, and even though they have spent time with him, seen him do all kinds of good things, they were afraid. Somebody with that much power that can calm a storm, what else can he do? So, part of it is their fear, but there's another point here that Mike makes is like, It's all about the money. But there's another part of it too that I think is a lesson, here for us. They come up and they see that these two guys who have terrorized this area for a long period of time are now well. They're healed. I think it's important also that the demons left these guys in a very visible way for two reasons. One is so that everybody in the region knows where these demons are, but it's especially important for these two guys to know, all right, it's over. They're not going to come back. You can get your life back. Okay, that's important. That was very important to them that, okay, they're gone. But part of the lesson I think for us to take from this is that how often do we focus on the negative news and not the good news? Now, part of it we can't help. As I was thinking about this, I opened up my computer one day this week and started looking at the headlines. I mean, it was we got a crisis at the border. We got a crisis in Afghanistan. I didn't know who Gabby Bettino was for a few weeks ago. Now I can't get her off my mind. I mean, and so I just kept reading. I said, surely. I went on and on and on before I finally found one story that was positive about a policeman who pulled a man out of a burning car. Everything else, bad news, all of it. So, as a society, we are fascinated with bad news. We're seeing that. What we have to be concerned about is that we don't let that become part of our nature. Where in our lives, in our daily lives, we focus more on the negative things in our life than on the blessings in our life. Now, don't name any names, but raise your hand if you know someone who you will never ask them, how are you doing? Because they will tell you for the next hour, they will tell you. You don't want to hear that, But just think about it now. How many times do we sometimes get together and we're sitting around, we're talking, and before we know it, we're trying to decide who has got the worst story to tell. Whose situation is worse. We're drawn to too many times to see the negative. When we were living in Louisiana, big duck hunting country down there, among a lot of other things, and there was this good Christian guy who had a neighbor who saw the negative in everything. He saw the gray cloud in the silver lining. I mean, he just saw it. And this guy, this good brother, was determined. He was going to get something good out of this guy. And so this Christian guy was a big duck hunter. He had a new duck dog, and so he said, "I want you to go duck hunting with me Saturday." You got to get up right. Shut up. I'm going to pick you up, and you're going with me, and you're going to have a good time. So picks him up. They get out there, the duck blind, get everything set up, and in no time, here ducks come in. Good Christian brother shoots one, and he says, "Watch this," and he sends his dog out there to get the duck. And the dog doesn't swim. He just walks right across the water, picks up the duck, comes back, and sets it right at his master's feet. And that brother looks over at him and says, What do you think of my dog? He says, your dog can't swim, can he? There are some people who always see the negative. And so these guys come up, and instead of being thankful, rejoicing, celebrating that these guys are finally free of these demons, it's like, you've killed our pigs, you got to go. Don't want to hear anything else about what you got to say. Don't know anything else good that you can do. I mean, if you can do this for these two guys, what else good can you do? We don't want to hear that. Just leave. So Jesus said, okay. And one of these guys, or maybe both of them, said, begged Jesus to go with him. And he says in verse 19, and he did not let him, but he said to him, go home to your people, which means they've got family, and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you. Now, we have no idea what happened after that. We have no idea if this guy was able to make the ground fertile for eventually, evangelists to be able to come in there. But I guarantee this guy had a story to tell. And I guarantee you they were thankful that they were rid of what had been tormenting them. So Jesus gets in his boat, and they get in their boats. And what a contrast. In verse 21, when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him. And so he stayed by the seashore. So he goes from one place where they are say leave, get out of here, to another area where they are anxiously waiting. They can't wait for him to get there. And it says one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and on seeing him fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. Now notice who comes to Jesus. This is a synagogue official. Jesus has been to many synagogues, and most of the time is not well received, because he's always breaking their rules. He's not breaking the law. He's breaking their rules, because you're healing somebody on the Sabbath. So many of the synagogue officials, the scribes, the Pharisees, they certainly would not welcome him. And for Jairus to leave and to publicly go and ask Jesus, this guy is either desperate or his motivation is, I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care if I lose my position. The only thing I care about is my daughter. And sometimes desperation will cause us to choose a possible solution that we would have never thought of before. But we don't care. We just want some help. I remember when our oldest daughter we finally realized she was addicted to drugs and alcohol. Now we're desperately trying to find some place for her, some place that's going to work. And we did, and it was a faith-based place, but it was Pentecostal. No offense to Pentecostals, okay? But it was out of my comfort zone. But I didn't care. I just wanted help. I just wanted my daughter to survive, to live, to be whole. And I'd work through all the rest of it. And she spent 9 months there, and thank God she is a sound, solid person today. So Jairus says, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. All I care about is my 12-year-old daughter's about to die. So he comes to Jesus publicly, in front of all these people, asking him to go. So it says he starts going off as a large crowd, and then in verse 25, Mark does this several times where he has a story within a story. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had gotten worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak, for she thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. So here we have this woman for 12 years. She has a hemorrhaging. And she has been everywhere she knows to go. And instead of getting any better, she's gotten worse. She has probably, if she hasn't spent everything she's got, she's spent most everything she's got. Desperately trying, because not only was this a terrible affliction physically, it was spiritually, but because of the hemorrhaging, she was ceremonially unclean. She could not go near the temple. Couldn't even be in some social situations. She is ostracized in many ways. And she's desperate. But she has this incredible faith. She thinks she's heard about this guy named Jesus, how he's healed all these people. And she's thinking, I'm kind of reading into this, so forgive me, but she's probably thinking, because of her affliction, I don't want to walk up publicly and tell him what my problem is. But if I can just touch his garment, I'll be well. She has that kind of faith. So she gets in the crowd. She's thinking, okay, this is perfect. Got all this mob here. If I can just get close enough to touch his garment, I'll be well, and then I can just go home. I can sneak out of here. Immediately, the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt it in her body that she was healed of her affliction. She thought, oh, I'm well. I'm healed. Immediately, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said, you got to be kidding. You're in a mob. You're in a crowd. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd like that before. I have. I don't want to be there again. The last time I was in one like that, I decided, if you get me out of here alive, we were in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, which is not a good idea in the first place. And the plan was to get out of the French Quarter for midnight, and we didn't. And I thought, God, if you will get me out of here alive and forgive me for even being here, I won't ever do anything like this again. I don't want to be in a crowd like this again. So his disciples said, what are you talking about? You're surrounded by people. Of course people are touching you. And it says, verse 32, and he looked around to see the woman who had done this. He makes eye contact with her. And now I think she's mortified. The woman, fearing and trembling of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Again, try to picture this woman now. She has gone from being tormented by this. She's healed. She thinks she can just get away. And Jesus turned around and calls her out. And she just drops to her knees and she tells him in front of all these people, these strangers, here was my problem. Has to say that publicly. And is probably expecting to be criticized for all this. Verse 34, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Called her daughter. Said, you're one of us. You've been healed. Go. Your faith did this. So Jairus is probably thinking, well, this is really good, but we need to get to my daughter. Well, they come tell him, hey, It's too late. Don't worry him. She's already died. So, verse 36, Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe." The literal translation of that basically says, okay, you came here believing, don't stop. Keep believing. Don't stop believing. He says, let's go. So they go to the house. They got there, and there were people loudly weeping and wailing, and he says, why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep. And they began laughing at him, but putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his companions. He took along Peter, James, and John. And he goes in there, and he takes the girl by the hand and tells her to get up. And she does. Now, a couple of things. It says that there were people loudly wailing. During that time, there were people whose jobs was to, when there was a death, they would go to the house of where it had died and just cry out loud, wail. I mean, even though they might not even know who that person is, there were people, that was what they did. What a miserable job. I mean, I think about all the jobs you passed up, and this is what you do. You know, you go and you wail and cry and weep, you know, all this time. So that's going on, and Jesus, you know, these people think, oh, he don't know what he's talking about. And it was important that Jesus took both the mother and the father and 3 other people, so they were actually witnesses to the fact this girl is dead. Because under, you know, Mosaic law, you had to have at least 2 witnesses. So they're all witnesses she's dead. So when Jesus raises her from the dead, there's not going to be any doubt this girl was dead, now she's alive. And it says, he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and that she should be given something to eat. Now, look at the contrast here between these 2 things that have happened. Jesus has these 2 men who've had their demons are gone, they're exorcised, they're out of there. And they want to go with him, and he says, no, go back home and tell your family, tell everyone what the Lord has done for you. Here, Jesus raises this girl from the dead. She has restored, I think it's his only child. He's given her back to her family. And he says, don't tell anyone. Why? Why does he say in one place, go tell everybody you can, and here, don't tell anyone? Yes, ma'am.
In my state, wasn't it one of the Jewish beliefs that Messiah would have power over death? I mean, there would be a lot of things that Messiah could do, but one of the very definitive signs would be that he had power over death.
Okay.
And so I'm wondering if that's, you know, obviously early in his ministry, Jesus did not want them to know that he was the Messiah.
Okay.
Yes, it wasn't time.
All right.
That's the thought.
No, that's a good one. Why would he not want that known in this early part of his ministry? Because that's a good point. Okay, we got, let's see.
It says in a lot of places, you know, his time has not yet come.
Okay.
So I'm going along with Lauren. I think if you read the gospel in Mark, it uses this expression more than any of the other gospels. He tells them, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. And maybe because he was across the Sea of Galilee over the other side where the Jewish leaders wouldn't hear about it, he didn't mind if that guy went to town and told everybody.
All right. But also look at who, on one side, Wally, he's talking to the Gentiles who don't know anything about Messiah. They don't know anything about that. Whereas the Jews they've been looking for this their whole life. But what Jesus did not want to happen, which does happen, it's just human nature, he didn't want people coming to him just to be fed or just to be healed. That was part of it. But more importantly, he wanted them to hear what he was saying, to hear the message about who the Messiah is. The Messiah is not just coming here to cure everybody of your diseases or to raise somebody from the dead, because eventually you're going to die anyhow. But he said, I want you to hear the message, what I have come to say. Yeah. Right. Right. I don't know. I just know that there's most of the time when you see where Jesus tells someone, don't go tell anyone. When he healed the leper, he says, "What do you do?" He says, "I just want you to go to the priest, have yourself checked out, make the proper sacrifice, and don't tell anyone." So what does he do? He goes tells everyone he knows. So, and there was times when Jesus was totally overcome with these crowds of people. Yeah.
Can I throw something in?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Jesus was spending a lot of time with his inner circle of followers that he handpicked to be with him. And also you have the multitude of people that are now following him because of these powerful wonders and things that have been performed. But I think there's also another circle that you need to understand too. There's the geopolitical circle of things that are going on around him. There are probably multiple things that are going on that are not in place quite yet for Jesus. Now I want to go back to that first circle, the one, his close inner circle of guys. If anything, he's got to make sure that they are ready to go into the world and do what needs to be done. He knows that he's got to be offered as a sacrifice. There's a lot of things that have to get cooked, if you will, and they're just now getting started. The cake is not ready to come out of the oven.
Yeah. Well, and also the more time he spends healing and doing those type things, he doesn't have time to do the very thing you're talking about. There's also one other thing I wanted to mention. It says that Jesus, he felt the power come out of him. We have to remember, and it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around, that Jesus, it wasn't a 50-50 thing. He was 100% divine, and he's 100% human. So when Jesus is, as I have read through this and looked at, when Jesus is performing all these miracles, when he's healing people, it's not that he's sitting there and said, "Okay, you're healed, next you're healed." This power is coming out of him, and I believe it is physically draining. I think it is a physical, emotional thing that he's doing with these people. It's exhausting. That's why you see sometimes where he is trying to get away to get some rest, because he is physically exhausted from going through the process of healing. he has the spiritual power, but he's also human. He's fleshly, and he has the emotions. So all of this is draining on him. So when Jesus, he can feel, he knows what has happened here. He understands that, and uses that as an opportunity to speak to this lady and make her understand, look, your faith is so incredible, it has made you well. What you have done, your faith, that you would not give up. And it would have been easy for her to give up. She sees this large crowd of people. She's thinking, okay, this Jewish official is far more important than I am. He's got a lot more clout, but she's not going to give up. She will not give up. She has got this faith, and she's going to see it through to the end. And maybe the lesson there for us is, how far are we willing to go with our faith? How, what is it that we are not willing to give up on until we have exhausted every possibility, until there's no other options left? What are we going to do? And she wasn't going to give up. She was firmly convinced, if I can just touch his garment, I'll be well. And she was. Yes?
When I think about her faith, I'm embarrassed to say that I lack a lot of faith. In that, the disciples took them years till they wrote the gospel to allow it to sink in, perhaps, then before we better understand a lot of what took place. And when they write these things, I look at this and I know God's word is true, but I find in my own life that I struggle when I'm in a certain situation to put my faith in Christ or to put my trust in myself. And so, for her to believe that this is the Messiah and to come forth and say, I'm going to press on and whatever it takes in the form of none of it, I know I'll do it. Someone like myself really needs to be reminded, because I need to face myself and be confronted with myself and say, God, Christ will take care of this, but you have got to be faithful in these kinds of circumstances.
Well, I think you're along with that, Todd. I think all of us have our crisis moments called being human. All right. Thank you very much. See y'all later.